I'm at gate F14 at the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport, and I'm going to LaGuardia Airport, and guess what? You're coming along with me. And no surprise for you, as you know, I made sure I checked the wind. The wind is favorable for the best view on the left-hand side of the airplane, so I'm sitting on the left-hand side tonight. New York City is not to be missed from above. When you are flying into LaGuardia Airport, you have got to see the sights. It is just spectacular. And there's a lot of work that goes into planning which side of the aircraft you should sit on. So I'm going to explain all of that to you right now. Now, this is my thought process that happened before I took the flight. It worked because I was rewarded with these great views of Manhattan. So when you're flying, you need to make a determination on what seat you should sit on. And of course, there are only window seats. The middle seat, the aisle seat, they just don't exist. You've got to sit in the window seat. That's step number one. So make sure that a window seat is available, because it's just not worth flying if you're going to sit in the middle or aisle seat, because the views are just amazing out there, especially when you're flying into LaGuardia Airport. So what did I do to prepare for my arrival into LaGuardia? Well, let me tell you, this is going to be like a briefing for the pilot, but for the passenger. There is a lot that you can do, and there's actually one simple thing that you can do that you can use the internet for, you can use multiple websites for before you fly into LaGuardia Airport, or any airport for that matter, but I'm going to focus specifically on LaGuardia here. That one thing that you need to do is check the weather. Go to a website and find out what the weather conditions are going to be for the time of your arrival. Now, of course, you can't do this days in advance. Sometimes you can't even do it a day in advance. This just might be right before you take off, and you may have the opportunity to switch to the side of an aircraft that's going to provide you the better views, but make sure you check the weather. Specifically, there's one thing in the weather forecast that you need to look at for the time of your arrival, and that is the wind. Simply, what direction is the wind coming from? Because aircraft need to land into the wind, and aircraft also need to depart into the wind. And at LaGuardia Airport, there are two runways, runway 422 and runway 1331, that intersect with each other, and both arrivals and departures will need to land into the wind so that they have wind coming in front of them as opposed to from behind them. The wind can come all the way up to a 90-degree angle to the side, but not behind in most cases. Now, this evening, flying into LaGuardia, I checked the wind at my arrival time, and the heading of the wind is 300 degrees, 300. That is going to be the factor that helps me decide which side of the aircraft to sit on. Now, of course, I do want to make sure that the weather is decent enough to look out the window. I want to make sure that the visibility isn't just 1 mile and the ceiling is, let's say, 300 feet overcast. I want to make sure that there's enough visibility, of course, and that the clouds are at least 4,000 feet or higher. But the wind is the most important factor, providing that the visibility is good enough. So, 300 degrees. That's coming from the northwest. So LaGuardia's got two runways, 422, 1331. Let's talk about runway 1331. Runway 13 is a southeast heading. It heads about 130 degrees. And the runway in the opposite direction is runway 31, which heads around 310 degrees. Now, the runway designation has to do with the actual compass heading of the runway, 310 degrees. And didn't I just tell you that the wind is coming from 300 degrees? Well, that's only 10 degrees offset from runway 31. So right away, you may think that we'll land on runway 31 tonight, because that's almost a direct headwind. It's only 10 degrees offset to one side. Well, that's not going to be the case for this evening, because LaGuardia does have two runways. And as a matter of fact, runway 31 is going to be used for departures this evening. So that leaves us with the other runway, runway 422. Runway 4 has a heading of 40 degrees, and runway 22 has a heading of 220 degrees. The wind is coming from 300 degrees, which is basically off to the side. But if the wind is coming from a particular angle where it still produces a slight headwind, that is the direction of landing that they are going to use at the airport. 300 degrees allows for aircraft to land on runway 22 with the wind coming from about an 80-degree crosswind. So it's not 90 degrees, it's not directly off to the side, it's 80 degrees. So runway 22 is going to be the arrival runway this evening. So I told you that runway 31 is going to be the departure runway and runway 22 is going to be the arrival runway. But how do we know that one runway should be designated for departures and the other runway should be designated specifically for arrivals? Well, for that, we need to take a look at the layout of LaGuardia. If you look at LaGuardia Airport, you can see that runway 1331, or runway 31, as it will be the departure this evening, is very close to the terminal area. Aircraft that are taxiing to the runway can easily get to the runway just by taxiing out towards the right and then lining up on the runway and taking off. It makes the flow very, very easy for aircraft to take off on runway 31. Runway 22 is going to be the arrival runway. And just think about that. If runway 22 were to be the departure runway, aircraft would actually need to taxi across runway 31 and then turn around, take off, and cross runway 31 a second time as they're taking off. At an airport like LaGuardia with crisscrossing runways, there are a lot of complications already when it comes to runways that intersect, and you do not want to have an aircraft departing crossing a runway 2 times. So runway 22 is going to be the ideal runway for landing. And once aircraft actually land on runway 22, they can take a path that goes straight towards the terminal buildings. So I've established the fact that tonight LaGuardia Airport will be landing on runway 22 and departing on runway 31. Now, that doesn't tell me anything about which side of the aircraft to sit on, but notice how I talked a lot about the departure runway, runway 31. Well, you see, again, the runways crisscross at LaGuardia, so for every arrival, there's going to be a departure. Look at runway 31. It's got a heading of around 310 degrees. Aircraft that take off on runway 31 will take off into airspace that is to the west of LaGuardia. Now, for almost every arrival coming into LaGuardia that originates in the west or the south, they will approach the New York City area from the south, around the lower New York Bay, and then proceed north towards the airport. Runway 22 is a runway that heads in the complete opposite direction of the arrival path from the south. Runway 22 has a southwest heading, and as you're approaching from the south, well, you're heading towards the north or northeast towards the airport. So it's necessary to bypass the airport, turn around, and then land on runway 22. Now, I talked about those departures on runway 31. Those aircraft are taking off into airspace that's to the west of LaGuardia. Therefore, the airspace to the east of LaGuardia is going to remain clear, so we can pass by LaGuardia Airport to its east. And because of that, Manhattan will be on the left-hand side of the airplane, and that's the reason why I chose the left-hand side of the airplane for landing today. I'm going to briefly show you some footage from the departure out of Minneapolis. I'm going to put this in fast forward because that's not what this video is all about. This video is about the arrival into LaGuardia. We had a nice and easy departure out of Minneapolis today. We took off and we headed right towards New York City. We began our descent over Pennsylvania. Once we reached the border between Pennsylvania and New Jersey, the pilot tuned his radio into a frequency called ATIS, or Automatic Terminal Information Service. On this frequency, the pilot received very important information about conditions at LaGuardia Airport, including the wind. The ATIS will also tell you what the active arrival runway is and what the active departure runway is. I was right. We're going to land on runway 22, we're going to pass by LaGuardia Airport to the east, and then we'll make a left-hand turn to join the final approach course.
LaGuardia Airport ATIS information Alpha 0251 Zulu. Wind 300 at 9. Visibility 10. 2 clouds at 6,000. 2 clouds at 25,000. Temperature 8. Dew point -4. Altimeter 3024. Remarks. AO2 sea level pressure 240.51014. ILS runway 22 approach and use land runway 22. Depart runway 31. Air Met Tango update 3. For turbulence valid until 300 Zulu. For further details contact New York Automated Flight Service Station. LaGuardia Class Bravo services. Available on frequency 126.05. Use caution for numerous birds in the vicinity of LaGuardia Airport. Advise on initial contact. You have information alpha.
Remember that if you're not subscribed to my channel, you're missing out on one of the most interesting and inspiring aviation channels out there, so consider subscribing so you don't miss my next video. As our flight approaches our destination of LaGuardia, we've been following a published arrival procedure that brings us towards Staten Island, and from there, we'll be guided by ATIS to LaGuardia Airport's runway 22 approach. We've begun our descent and are approaching airspace governed by the New York Approach Control Facility, so it's time to check in with the controller who will guide us from here to the airport.
Hotel 1027 through the 10,000.
1027, you're leaving altimeter 3026.
We checked in at 10,000 feet. Tonight is a very quiet night at LaGuardia, and for the most part, we're going to follow the arrival procedure all the way to the eastern end of New Jersey. The procedure has us flying in an easterly direction, and many of the turns are made on our own following the arrival route. Once we get closer to New York City, the controller will tell us which way to turn to get to the final approach course to runway 22. We kept a high altitude for a while as there was no need to bring us too low. Once we got closer to the city, we were asked to descend to 4,000 feet.
1027 is going to maintain 4,000.
Not a 4,000 up, 1027.
As we descended, the city lights increased in intensity. As we flew by Staten Island, we needed to turn to the left so we could proceed in the direction of the airport, and the controller actually told us to proceed directly to LaGuardia.
Delta 1027, direct to LaGuardia.
LaGuardia does 1027.
We've been asked to tune our navigational device to the LaGuardia VOR, which is located on the runway 22 pier. We turn towards that navigational device, which points our nose right toward the airport. As I described at the beginning of the video, we will eventually have to bypass the airport to the east, then turn around to the left to land, but asking us to turn to the airport positions us between Manhattan and Kennedy Airport's airspace so we don't interfere with other aircraft. We continue over Staten Island on an approximate 40-degree heading with New Jersey in the distance. In a few moments, my decision of sitting in an A seat will pay off, as I will get a beautiful nighttime view of the island of Manhattan. But first, I'm going to zoom in to an icon in New York Harbor, the Statue of Liberty. And just past Lady Liberty are the skyscrapers of Manhattan. As we get closer to LaGuardia, the controller sets us up for a turn around to the airport. He'll tell us to turn slightly to the right and then to turn left to join a downwind leg to runway 22.
Delta 1027, fighting 060.
It's 060, that's 1027.
The 60-degree heading affords us a great view of LaGuardia Airport, yet another reason to sit on the left side of the airplane. We'll be landing on runway 22 in just a few short minutes. The terminal areas are very well lit at night. Around the airport, we're told to descend from 4,000 to 3,000 feet.
1027 is going to maintain 3,000.
3,000 out 1027.
The lower altitude, of course, brings us closer to the ground as our flight crew goes through the final preparations in the cockpit. Here we have a fantastic view of our arrival runway, runway 22, as we fly in the opposite direction of landing. Since runway 22 is the active arrival runway, we can actually see an aircraft on final approach over the East River getting ready to land. The East River and Flushing Bay border the north side of the airport. The East River continues east under the Whitestone and Throgs Neck bridges. We are number 3 for landing, and over the Bronx we can see the second aircraft that's about to land on runway 22 just before we do. The controller preps us for a tight approach to the runway. So earlier than normal, we slow down and descend all the way to 2,000 feet.
Delta 1027, reduce to 180 knots, then descend to 2,000.
Go to 180 and 2,000 out 1027.
A descent to 2,000 feet often occurs much further along when the airport is busy, but ATC is taking advantage of the free airspace and getting us in as quickly as possible. As we continue along, we have a great view of the Bronx and the Throgs Neck Peninsula. We then continue over Long Island Sound. As I had planned, we remained east of Manhattan and the airport, and we are now in the final stages of flight preparing for landing. At this point, the controller tells us to turn to the left to northwest and to let him know when the airport is in sight from the cockpit.
Delta 1027, turn left heading 310, advising you get the airport, right?
Hey, 310, we'll do it out 1027.
We make the left turn to 310 degrees south of City Island in the Bronx. This is really rare, since LaGuardia Airport is generally a very busy airport. Often, aircraft don't turn around until they've reached places in Westchester County like Mamaroneck. As we turn, the pilot looks to the left and sees the airport.
Airport set out 1027.
The 1027 for visual approach to runway 22.
Visual 22 out 1027.
With the clearance for the visual approach to runway 22, we can keep turning towards the extended center line of the runway by looking out the window. And now we can contact the control tower at the airport for landing clearance.
1027, you the California time, 18.7. You have a good night.
18.7 out 1027, good night.
There are a lot of lights in New York City at night, so it may be tough to locate the airport, but I'm zooming into it for you now. The runway can be identified by red lights at the beginning of the runway. And just beyond the airport, while in our left turn, we can see the skyscrapers of Manhattan. We've traveled almost all of the city in just a few short minutes. This is an exciting portion of the flight, and all the pilot needs to do is look out the window to land. I'll zoom back into the runway for the last possible moments that we as passengers on the left side can see it while the pilot contacts the control tower.
Delta 1027 visual 22.
Delta 1027, so land 22.
Land 22 out 1027.
With the runway and path in front of us clear, we are cleared to land on runway 22. We are turning a tight turn tonight, and after flying over the Long Island Sound, we fly over the eastern side of the Bronx. We can see the Throgs Neck neighborhood below. We're flying straight into runway 22. Everything that we see here we previously saw as we passed by the airport a few minutes ago, but we now have a new perspective of the area, and we're much closer to the ground. Up front, the flight deck crew keeps the runway in sight as they make final configurations for landing on runway 22. The wind is coming from 300 degrees, which is at an 80-degree angle, but still provides for a headwind, as mentioned at the beginning of this video. We're spending the last few moments of the flight over the Bronx by the Whitestone Bridge. The two bridges, the Whitestone and Throgs Neck, are off to the side of the final approach course, so they're not obstructions to our path. And we're about to fly over water over the East River where the airspace is free and clear for the arrival of this airplane. Let's land on runway 22 directly in front of us. As we slow down, the controller on the tower tells us to turn left and to contact ground control.
1027, first left turn, join Bravo, contact ground, good night.
Left turn, join Bravo, that's 1027, good night.
It's our pleasure to welcome you to New York City, where the local time is 11:13. Please stay seated with your seatbelt fastened and carry on items stowed until the aircraft is parked at the gate and the captain has turned off the seatbelt sign. Be careful when opening overhead bins to avoid injury from items that may have shifted during flight. As you deplane, please remember to take a look around your seat and make sure you have everything you brought on board. On behalf of Delta and this New York City-based crew, we've enjoyed having you on board and we look forward to seeing you soon. Have a wonderful evening.
As we vacate the runway and turn to the left, we can see the lights of the next aircraft behind us that's going to land on runway 22. At this point, we're going to contact the ground controller as instructed by the tower controller.
LaGuardia ground, Delta 1027, join Bravo and gate is Delta 9.
Alright, Delta 1027 ground, taxi Bravo, November to the rim.
Bravo, November to the rim.
And with those instructions, we taxied quickly to our gate on this quiet evening at LaGuardia. Once again, another great approach to runway 22. Thank you. Welcome to New York City. I always love those approaches to runway 22 when I'm sitting on the left-hand side of the aircraft. Great view of Manhattan, and we did a very, very tight left turn to the runway. I think it was a visual approach. Well, you never know what you're going to get when you come to LaGuardia. Thanks so much for watching my channel. And if you haven't subscribed, please consider doing so. Hit that subscribe button below. Thanks, everybody.